Fixing and/or amending the criminal justice system in Delaware is one of the things we're about to talk about on the Delaware Way with Senator Margaret Rose Henry. Thank you for coming in. It's your first time here.
Yes, it is, and it's my pleasure.
I appreciate you being here. Let's talk about criminal justice reform. What do you see as some of the things, or because it's a wide topic,
Absolutely.
Some of the things that need to be done in Delaware?
Well, first of all, the criminal justice system adversely impacts on African Americans and people of color, as you know, in our United States. More African Americans, for example, are imprisoned, and more Hispanics than other races. So we need, and especially in Delaware, we need to do something about reforming our prison system so that we don't have such a large incarceration of minorities. So there have been several bills proposed. One just passed the Senate. Senator Peterson sponsored Senate Bill 163, which has to do with what's called a 3 strikes and you're outlaw that a lot of people know about. And what that says is that if you've committed 3 crimes, then you get a life sentence, no matter how small the crimes might have been. So her legislation reduces that to be able to look at all 3 crimes and then have a more reasonable output in terms of how much time you should serve. It passed the Senate, and it's on its way to the House now to be considered. I've been working with a group called the New Jim Crow, and I'm really proud of the fact that this is the religious community who've really taken a stand on what's happened as it relates to the criminal justice system and the inequities that African Americans in particular suffer with that. So it's called the New Jim Crow Coalition, and it's churches and religious organizations, as I said, who meet. And they've come to me and asked me to sponsor legislation, so I've been meeting with them. One has to do with looking at sentence modification. A lot of times people were sentenced for something years and years ago, but the laws have changed since then, but they're still serving these long sentences. And so this bill would allow them to have their sentences reviewed and modified so that they could have what's called credit for good time, for example. If they've taken courses to rehabilitate themselves, then they could use all of that to apply for good time credit.
It's had some pushback from Republicans who say that we need to keep repeat offenders off the streets, and this is one of the few ways in the law that they can do that.
Well, 2 things. One, people who have committed very, very bad crimes would not be eligible. So it's not for horrific crimes. It's only for things, it's not, for example, it's not if you committed murder. You could not do that.
Well, you shouldn't be back on the street after one.
Right,
I mean,
right.
That wouldn't be a 3-strike thing.
But for example, your 3rd strike might be a marijuana charge, but perhaps you did armed robbery and maybe you did some other violation, and then the 3rd thing was maybe marijuana. But because of the 3 strikes and you have a life sentence, you have a life sentence, and it doesn't make sense.
And one of the counter arguments has been, it's not the criminal justice system, it's poverty and education. And that's creating a climate where there are more crimes committed in certain neighborhoods than there would be, and more police presence in those neighborhoods because of the crime. And that's the reason for the incarceration, and not the judicial system. Is that fair?
Well, I think you need to look back even further. I think you need to look at what happened with slavery. You know, we passed a resolution recently to abolish, to acknowledge that slavery was really bad and really wrong. 150 years later, there's still vestiges of what happened. It impacts on education, on economics. It impacts on where you can live. So African Americans are always suffering as a result of past history. And so that means that many more of us are incarcerated unfairly because we haven't had the opportunity to get the deal.
That's interesting that you said unfairly.
Right.
And you can prove the unfairness of it?
Well, let me tell you why I say unfairly. Many times when an African American who is low income goes before the criminal justice system, they don't have money for an attorney. So unless they can get a public defender, they don't have the same advantages for someone, for example, who is middle class and probably white. They can pay a fine for marijuana, for example, and they're out. Someone could be incarcerated for having a small amount of marijuana because they just don't have money to post bail or have an attorney represent them. We cannot imprison everyone for everything that's been done. We can't build enough prisons to take care of all the people. We need to look at rehabilitation. We need to look at opportunities for people to improve their lives.
We're running out of time, and there's
God.
so many things we had to talk about.
I wanted to talk about a lot more than
and the
certainly
Equal Pay Day, too, which is today. We're taping
Right.
on April 12th. Could you come back?
Maybe. You didn't let me talk about what I wanted to, so I'll think about it.
No, we just got caught up in that. I
No, you want to
apologize
talk
for
about
that.
But I want to say that today is Equal Pay Day, and what I want to say is that women are still not earning as much as men. They only earn, if you're white, you earn 82%. If you're African American, you earn 70%. If you're Latino, you own 60%.
I'm glad you got that in.
All right.
And I apologize. We spent so much time on the first topic.
That's okay.
Senator Margaret Rose Henry, who was here to talk about equal pay and bullying and autism, and we spent the time, and it was my fault talking about the criminal justice system. Is that better?
I like that better.
All right. Delaware Way returns after this.